Welcome everybody to another episode of Spartan Theology. I did an open stream last night that went pretty well, and then it kind of went off the rails towards the end, and we had to kind of cut it short. So I figure we'd pick back up where we left off, and as I knock everything over, kind of pick back up where we left off, and just see where it goes from there. Anybody that wants to join, like you could see at the beginning, but the Zoom link's in the description of the video. So yeah, just feel free to hit that and come in. We can start out. My buddy Eddie hasn't been on the channel before, and he just started his own podcast, so we'll kind of start out, let him plug his stuff a little bit, and then from there we'll just kind of open it up to conversation. But yeah, if you just want to kind of plug your channel, Eddie, and like I said, we'll go from there.
Yes, I appreciate it, Ethan. Just started Brute Facts podcast, where it's kind of a laid back style. We just hang out, kind of interview style, drink a little beer, and We have atheists, agnostics, Christians, theists, whoever wants to come on. So it's usually Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Central on YouTube. And I would definitely like to see you there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. You've had a few good shows already. You had Adam Coleman on there. That was pretty cool. And then your buddy Britt or whatever. So, yeah, yeah. And Ruben, I don't think we've ever met before. So, yeah, thanks for coming on. If you kind of want to
Hey,
introduce yourself a little bit so we can kind of get an idea. It's kind of your religious background a little bit. If you want to share, yeah, just a few things so we can kind of get an idea who you
yeah,
are. But,
sure, no
yeah.
problem. Sure. So my name is Ruben. Hi guys, how y'all doing? I run a fledgling YouTube channel. I've been trying to get off the ground for a while now. It's called The Placebo Effect, and it's basically just kind of a personal lens of explaining like my worldview shift from a former atheistic lens into a Christian worldview, right? And one of the big things that I try to do when I focus on what kind of an episode do I want to release is it practically relatable, right? Because one thing that I've noticed is my wife's told me this is I kind of have like a gift for apologetics, so to speak, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to make the mistake of armchair quarterbacking. And by that I mean is I think too many people that are not like professionally educated in the discipline of philosophy make the mistake, whether they're from a theistic or an atheistic camp, of taking very academically critical concepts and misconstruing them when they dumb it down in a lay perspective, right? And so I want to kind of avoid that and not like misspeak out of a comfort zone by just like reading a book or Googling something and thinking I'm all of a sudden like, a five and dime expert. And I would just rather just talk from my own like lens of how I view the world, how I see the world, how the world has changed for me. And maybe in that, the relatability will win people to Christ, right?
Nice, nice. That sounds really cool. Yeah, if you want to shoot me the link to that,
Yeah, sure.
either, yeah, probably easiest in like the Zoom chat, or I'll put it in the description of the video so people can go check that out. But yeah, that's cool. So yeah, thanks for joining. And Mark was on last night. He's kind of introduced himself as if you want to just, you're an agnostic, I guess is the best way you like to consider yourself, right? If I'm not, I'm pretty, I know
Yeah,
I'm right, but yeah, it's just
yeah, that's about right. I mean, I guess I could probably straddle the fence between atheist and agnostic.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I know one thing. And then we got another guy coming in here, some bum named John Depew who copied my hoodie yesterday, so that was pretty lame. But no, but yeah, something we brought up last night that I definitely wanted to start with was yeah, I'm trying to like, as long as he's joining before I actually like spell this out. But yeah, I guess Mark, you could probably ask your question again. That's probably the best way before I like straw man under a question or kind of get it wrong. But that your whole question kind of about like how we come to know things about God and the whole idea of like disagreements between Christians and stuff. Like so many Christians come to such different ideas and stuff like that. But yeah, if you kind of spell that out, and then I guess we can go from there. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, this is kind of was inspired by me watching Nathan Ormond's YouTube channel when he was interviewing Aaron, ex-Christian Aaron, and Aaron said that one of the things that sort of gave her some doubts. I guess it's one of many things for her. It's not the one thing that caused her to lose her faith, but one of the things that gave her some doubts was when somebody in her church, felt that God had spoken to her, to him or her in a certain way, and she just felt like, no, that can't be right, and she just didn't feel like that it was possible that God could be, speaking to the person in a certain way, and she just kind of felt like why. The conclusion she reached was, why is it that God isn't providing a consistent message to everybody? It seems like you got all these people coming out with conflicting revelations or conflicting ideas. And so from there, I kind of go, yeah, how does someone reliably understand God, his nature, etc.?
Yeah, and I just realized, like, I think people can hear us, but, like, no one can see us at all, so I'm just fixing this really quick. I think I'm a pro at this sometimes, and then I realize I am far from that. So hold on.
Such a rookie mistake.
Yeah, it really is. What a bum. Come on now. But yeah, if somebody wants to pick that up while I fix this, but everybody can hear us just fine. They just like can now they can only see Eddie's face. But yeah, so yeah, sorry, I'm like whatever. If somebody wants to pick that up, or you could kind of like restate your question a little bit because I definitely wasn't listening and like lost my mind because for some reason Zoom does not want to show up. Gallery view. Yeah. Hello, John. You can say hello at least. How about that so we could fill some dead air?
What's up, guys?
Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
How's it
Good
going?
hello. That was very...
Sorry, I was gonna
No,
look at the
You're
stream.
good. I just
Yeah.
wanted somebody to say something while I try and...
It's just the stars right now.
Yeah, exactly. Why? I'm
Mhm.
trying to figure out why this doesn't want to show us on Zoom. Here you go. Now you can see a horribly zoomed in picture. We're getting there, guys. I think it's like easy, and I'm just gonna go live, and I don't need to prepare too much, and then this happens. But
So can I ask a question?
yeah,
Since,
go ahead.
of
Go
the
ahead.
five of us, says I guess I was late to the intro roundtable. So how many of the five are in the theistic camp versus those that are in the agnostic / atheist camp?
Okay, yeah. So I'm a Christian, and yeah. So for myself, I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian for about 4.5 years or so at this point, so not super long. I mean, I grew up in a Christian household, but never really took it serious till about 4 years ago or so. And Eddie's a Christian, John's a Christian, and then Mark's agnostic. And we got the stream on.
It depends on the day. Yeah, for me.
Yeah. Well, it depends on who you talk to, honestly, is probably the better question. Because there's been a number of people who don't want to call you a Christian, but that's a separate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I thought Mark was gonna have some folks on here with him. What's going on with the?
I
Yeah,
asked,
Aaron, I
Autumn.
think, was busy.
Yeah, I know Aaron was busy.
Autumn is the only one who
Yeah, Autumn. That's
said-
right. Yeah.
said she might make it, but so I kind of yelled at her on Twitter.
Oh, good.
to get in here.
Good.
Yeah, and then Ron, who's been on before, he said he'd probably join a little later, and Travis said he would join a little later. So, but yeah, we need more atheists, agnostics. You're in the lion's den over here, Mark. You're gonna become a Christian if you
No,
stay
no.
away too long.
No, you're not. You're fine, man.
Yeah, I trust you guys.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's my naivete.
Maybe so.
No, but yeah, let's I guess we can kind of pick up with this idea, and I definitely wasn't listening, so unless somebody else wants to pick up where you left off, or you kind of want to repeat your question a little bit, and I'll pick up. But yeah, I was trying to fix the live stream as you were talking, so I'm a
Okay,
terrible
yeah,
host.
I guess I'll just say, yeah. I mean, should we expect that? I mean, should we expect God would have a consistent message for mankind, and not only a consistent message, but consistently communicated in such a way as so that believers would be, reflecting that message in a very similar way. It appears when we look around, the world, that different, even within the broadly Christian community, that there seems to be a lot of different messages being sent on a variety of topics. So, yeah, do you find that still consistent with the idea that God is sending a consistent message, or not?
Yeah, one thing I will point out that I think why this argument is more powerful than for a lot of people than I think it is, and this definitely doesn't answer the question, but it's just a point towards the answer, is that as someone I'm starting to get more and more committed to universalism every day basically, but even without that, coming to the realization that no matter how it works out, it definitely doesn't come down to just which propositions you would answer true or false on a test. And that's how I think a lot of Christians think about it like, okay, if you can answer these certain questions correctly, like that's how you get to heaven. And so that, like, knowing that the fact that, like, if I have it right or wrong, that's not what determines I get to heaven. I think that kind of like takes some of the teeth out of the argument, or just makes it less powerful. But that definitely doesn't answer the question. I won't like pretend that it does or anything. But I think for a lot of people, like, if you think that if you have a, say you're like mistaken and you're a Unitarian as opposed to a Trinitarian, that and you go to hell, then like that seems to make a lot of sense. That, okay, how is God sending this message? Why are so many people confused and going to hell because of it? But at least under my view, I don't think like anyone's going to hell for these reasons. So that definitely, like I said, takes some of the teeth out of the argument, but it definitely doesn't answer it. So I'm kind of curious what the other guys think. But I definitely think it's an argument there, and that's something I've been like, as after you posed it yesterday, I've been really thinking about more and more, and really don't exactly know where I stand.
Yeah, I would. It's hard for me to believe that there's some type of litmus test of beliefs, that someone has to hold. I mean, the truth of the matter is we don't even choose most of our beliefs. It's we are
I don't
usually.
think any of our beliefs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are times that we believe something and we're confronted with a defeater. We should. I mean, we will change. What we believe about certain things. Being more of an evidentialist myself, I think if it can be shown that there is a significant defeater to the resurrection, I wouldn't be a Christian. I would still, however, be probably, a deist or something of that nature, classical theist, because I'm really convinced by the arguments for God in general. I just, I think there's too many metaphysical questions that are left unanswered without the God hypothesis. But I actually had this discussion earlier with someone about beliefs, and if you go back and you look in scripture and you look up specifically salvation and you look at all the scriptures around salvation, most of them don't even really talk about belief. And a few of them say to, believe in Christ or have faith in Christ. And being a non-fideist myself, that's just, you put your trust in Christ. But it's this thing about having to believe that, the Trinity or, Christ is, have to believe a certain position that Christ holds, whether he's equal with the Father or not. So all these things just don't seem to be scriptural when people try to, force a litmus test of beliefs that we have to have.
Well, okay, so maybe, but at the same time, like, I think, and if so, let's ground on, I guess, what we're talking about, universalism. If we're saying that universalism equates to the bumper sticker coexist, then I would say I don't agree with that concept.
Yeah.
So we're not saying that?
No.
Okay.
That's not what we're getting at.
Okay. Okay. So part of why I went there, though, is because, like, I'm very much down with, like, and I'll coin Tim Keller, where every view is exclusive, and the claim that there is an objective view is actually a subjective claim, right? So in that context, that's why I'm very cautious with drinking the Kool-Aid, where people are like, well, why can't everybody go here, and why does there have to be like certain rules about that? And it's like, well, you can apply that to anywhere. And so in that case, when I hear the word litmus test, I'm like, well, everybody's got a criteria, and even atheists, believe it or not, have a criteria. Like, I actually had people that were criticizing one of my episodes, and like some internet troll was just like, you're not an atheist, you're a liar, you were never an atheist, you're so stupid to be an atheist, as if there's like some criteria on defining what an atheist is or isn't. It just made me laugh, right? But anyway, I just wanted to add that in there. So.
Well, for clarification, I'm not a universalist. I'm a hopeful universalist, but I'm not a universalist. So,
but I guess so. But that does go back to the question. Like, let's establish ground rule. Like, what are we defining when we say, what does that mean?
As far
What
as
is a
universalism.
universalist, right?
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
believe that like all creation essentially will be reconciled to Christ in the end, and like all people will be saved through Christ in the end. That's really kind of what I'm getting at. Is a like very one sentence.
So that's an interesting concept, but I would say the two things biblically that probably dispute that directly, right? From Christ. So if we take Christ's statement in the Gospels, and then also again, even though it was John writing it, it was still technically him taking what Jesus was revealing to him. Is one, there's a narrow gate, so that implies that not everybody goes there, right? And then the second one is that there are two different forms of judgment, right? So that alone, I would say, disputes that everybody will be saved.
Yeah, see, I definitely believe in judgment, and John's the best guy to talk about this. Like, he's where I've been learning a lot from him and people like David Bentley Hart and things like that. But yeah, John's the more of the Bible guy. So I'm just
Yeah, I don't want to stray too far away from the
exactly.
Mark's,
Yeah, we don't need to talk about this
idea.
forever.
But
'cause
what I will say is that I think universalism can actually handle the harsh sort of judgment text that you brought up quite consistently in a sort of two eschatological horizon kind of approach, which is what Gregory of Nyssa did. Origen, Theodore of Mopsuestia, quite a lot of other early theologians who saw those judgment and harsher texts sort of within a prior horizon to the horizon of all horizons, which is God reconciling God's self to God reconciling humanity to himself in Christ, which is the ultimate horizon. But I don't want to kind of go down that route unless we can get there eventually later on. I'd be happy to talk about that. I've made some videos on this on my channel. And I've done various interviews on this, so I feel like I've been a bit talked out on this.
Yeah, and it's
I didn't mean to derail. So
yeah,
no,
you're fine, Ruben. It's just like when
no, and I've never met you, Ruben, yet. So
yeah, when
I
universalism gets brought up, it seems to get like drilled into the ground for like about 3 weeks or whatever until nobody feels like.
Hey, well, you know what? I come from a technology professional background, and I'm totally always about let's start at the 50,000-foot view first.
No.
So that's more where I was fishing anyway. I don't want to get in the weeds if we can avoid topics.
No. Yeah. Sure. But I'm happy to talk about it later on if we get there, for sure. But yeah, Mark, on your question, I think the difficulty with the Christian kind of conception of God that I don't know how many Christians really get this either, is that God is not a being among other beings, right? Or a thing among other things. So when we're trying to analyze God like another contingent sort of thing in reality, we're doing something slightly wrong. I mean, we can even think within reality with like the sciences, for example. Yeah, we have consensus on certain things, but that's always ever changing, and it's kind of in flux too. Consensus shifts. We move from different sort of established positions to other ones given new sorts of understandings, right? And that's even within just this reality. Even more so, I think, with God, because God is not a being or a thing among beings and things in reality in the same way that all sorts of things that we interact with are. So I think it's kind of no wonder why there's so many different kinds of perspectives on this, because of that. I think reality from the Christian perspective. So even with something like science, it's never that, oh, we've got this now, definitively. That's never how science works. And I think science is always kind of pushing back against that. It's always about sort of changing and finding new things. The consensus is really always shifting. As far as the clearest route from a Christian perspective to understanding what God is really like is where God has revealed God's self most fully and come into contact most clearly with humanity, which is Jesus Christ. That's where that happens. It's in that person, divine and human, in that location. That's where we understand what God is really like. And I think there is a consistency with Christians who are attending closely to that. Yeah, we have other sorts of views that are sort of diverging from that, and that's fine. But we also have to keep in mind, too, that a lot of the changes within Christianity also have to do with changing political and social situations too. It's not just different perspectives on sort of revelation without any context. We have to remember that there are other forces that are changing things too. So even with the Reformation, both the German and Tudor Reformation, lots of other forces were at work there too. So I think for me, it's no wonder that things have changed so much and that there are a diversity of perspectives. And I think that's okay. I really do. I don't think it follows from that therefore there's a problem with Christianity. I guess I'm not sure where that logic is coming from, in my view. But if you want to follow up on that, Mark, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So, I suppose when one looks around the world and looks at, about a third of the population of the world is, broadly speaking, Christian.
Sure.
Maybe a little bit less is Muslim, but even within Islam, you have this the Shia Sunni split and other smaller sects within Islam, and you have Buddhism, you have Hinduism, and lots of other smaller religions. And then let's look at Christianity. You have the Catholic Church, you have Eastern Orthodox, you've got the various Protestant denominations, and I suppose one can take a kind of a big tent view and just kind of look at all the Christian. If we're not going to go again, I guess I don't want to get into the universalism issue again, but if you weren't going to go full on universalism, you could still at least look at the Christians and say, there might be differences between the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic and various Protestant denominations, differences between the Baptists and the Pentecostals and so on. Yeah. But broadly speaking, they're all Christian, and so they all have enough accuracy, if that's the right word, to be worth following. So, I suppose one could take that view, but in that case, maybe my argument doesn't really have as much resonance, because it's like even if you wind up in the Pentecostal church instead of the Baptist church, or the Eastern Orthodox versus the Catholic church, hey, you haven't really done anything wrong. You haven't really made the wrong decision. Notwithstanding some of these preachers out there who will say, no, if you go Catholic, you're not, you're in trouble, that kind of thing. So I think maybe that does. I think Ethan was right, when he mentioned universalism as possibly taking the edge off of this question, because it kind of allows for the margin of error thing. It allows for the fact that human beings are limited in their ability to know all of what is out there to know, and so if they get a few details wrong, they're going to be okay anyway. That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. One thing I would want to kind of hammer home before others can chime in, which please do, is that there are other reasons, especially to do with cultural and political situations, why the church has been sort of dispersing in various ways. It's not just that we have, that God is sort of revealing in the sort of, what would be the right word for this? God's revealing in some sort of less than coherent way, and God could do better. It's more that the problem seems to be more on our side of things and less to do with on God's side of things from where I'm coming from. It really has more to do with a lot of the changing and the flux of history and realities that we're involved with that kind of muddle things up a bit. But yeah.
Something I would kind of want to add, though, is we're kind of talking all about these differences that Christians come to and all these different things, but something that really is a powerful thing for me, being a Christian, is when I meet someone. I know I've thought about this a number of times, when I met John and Travis, especially, talking to these people, when you start getting into deep theological conversations with other Christians, it kind of blows my mind how we've it seems like we're talking about the same person when we talk about Jesus, and I'm not saying that like in like like that proves it to me or whatever, but like it blows my mind sometimes when I'm like, wow, we really do like know this person or something. Like there's this person out there, like we can talk about, like I can tell you about my friend Doug or whatever. I don't know why I thought of Doug. That was the first thing
Pine
that
Creek
came
Duck,
to
yeah,
my mind.
yeah.
I should have done that. But I can tell you about my random friend or whatever, and like it's clear that you don't know the person I'm talking to, or like when you talk to me about your friends, like I don't know that person, but like we talk about Jesus, and it just seems so different that like we really do have this connection to this person. I think you're muted, Travis, but yeah. So it's like some like kind of the opposite end of this, like the similar things that we come to understand and think can be pretty powerful. So there is like another side to this argument I kind of wanted to just throw out there.
Good point.
Yeah, and welcome, Travis. I think you're trying to get the sound going, but yeah, thank you for coming on. And once you do, I'll let
So, as an example of this, I'm sure that the Christians on here would affirm that Jesus is the Lord. Yeah?
maybe.
Yeah. Maybe some days. Yeah. So, like,
Yes.
yeah. It's a good point of agreement.
For sure.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind, almost all the different denominations are basically disagreements on how to do church and worship. Most
point.
denominations agree on the essentials. So when we talk about so much disagreement, it's really not as much as those outside who are unaware of the differences. It seems overwhelming that you would have so many denominations, but truth be told, like I said, it's just really how to conduct worship is where most of the disagreements are.
Maybe, right? I think I agree with you in the sense that a lot of the nuances of the differences to the denominations is probably what would be easily phrased as an intramural argument, right? I think that there is definitely a case to be made, though, where there are some fundamental disputes with respect to, and this might go tie back to that earlier litmus test angle, where there are some denominations that do actually like add criteria to what they claim to be the ingredients for salvation, right? Oh, it's grace, but it's grace plus this, or it's grace, or it's this grace plus this and that, depending on the denomination. And that I would disagree strongly, that we should all aspire to simply accept the gospel of grace, period, end of discussion. There is no and definitely not a but, right? So.
Yeah, but with let's take the U.S. for example. Most of the Protestant churches are evangelical, and it's almost unanimously agreed that we're saved by grace through faith. So when you start talking
about, I
don't
know that I would agree with that distinction at all. I'd say that probably the term, at least in modern U.S. structure, evangelicalism contains its own separate denominational distinction, right? So let's establish that based on that Protestantism is a distinction from Catholicism, and then evangelicalism is a distinction from Protestantism.
No, I don't think so.
Evangelical. I'm
we have stats on this too, that evangelicals are the overwhelming Christian identification in the U.S. That's very true.
And I'm talking from statistics. It is.
You're saying more than Baptist and Presbyterian, that the evangelical...
the Southern Baptists are evangelicals. They identify as such, and it's the biggest denomination in...
Yeah, it would be...
Okay, then we're kind of back to let's establish terms. Okay, so if you're going to go with that, then all right, then I'm okay with it.
Yeah, the evangelical typically covers Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, Southern Baptist, Assemblies of God, the charismatic churches. It covers a gauntlet of Protestant churches.
Okay, we're good.
Yeah, but
Mark, was that kind of helpful in response?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that if you take a, well, I mean, like if you're in a Pentecostal church where they say that, hey, if you're not doing the speaking in tongues and whatnot, you're just not really on the right road here. Now, what you're kind of saying is no, you disagree with that. And also, if you were to go maybe to some Baptist church where they're saying if you are into that kind of stuff, you're on the wrong road, and you might also say they're wrong. In other words, they might be too exclusionary in their theology. I mean, is that fair? A fair assessment
Well,
of
yeah,
what you're...
to that point, my experience growing up Southern Baptist was they never, none of the churches I was a part of ever said that those who believed in speaking in tongues, this, that, or the other, weren't saved. They were just, not correct about the evidence of the Spirit. And from what I understand in the charismatic churches, the speaking in tongues was just an evidence that you were saved. It wasn't something that was necessary to be saved. So I think there's a lot of, from my understanding, there seems to be a bit of misunderstanding about how important the speaking in tongues are.
Yeah,
but I could be wrong.
Yeah, something I could bring up though, and Aaron in the chat
Ethan.
is saying some things, and if you guys want to pull up the chat on the YouTube thing, you can see there's some stuff. But she's like talking about, and there is like, I definitely say like a large majority of like splits are over like definitely secondary or tertiary or just like more ecumenical type disagreements. But I mean, there are like salvation disagreements, eschatology, like literal, non-literalism, egalitarian, like role of women, and these things are very important, and they are pretty strong disagreements that people have. So yeah, I don't know like if we just want to write everything off, and I don't think we necessarily are, as like, such minor disagreements, kind of like what Ruben was saying. Like there are some pretty fundamental differences between different denominations and stuff, but I still definitely agree, like for the most part it's not. I don't know, that's just kind of what she was bringing up. I'm like thinking as I'm reading it, but yeah, really the main thing is kind of like there are some pretty major disagreements, but I don't think any of us are like fundamentally disagreeing with that. Just that.
Well, yesterday I brought up the a Bible Answer Man from a show that I used to listen to in the mid 1990s, and that's a guy named Hank Hanegraaff. And then about two or 3 years ago, he converted to Eastern Orthodox, and Pastor John MacArthur roundly criticized him for doing that. And now, granted, I realize John MacArthur does not speak for all of Protestant Christianity, even all of evangelical Christianity or whatnot. But there is some of that. Occasionally, you can come across some Catholic guy with a YouTube channel who will say, if you're not in our church, man, you're just not getting it.
Sure.
But so there is that. But then you could also broaden it further and say, hey, what about those Buddhists out there in East Asia? And what about the Hindus out in India and so on and so forth? Obviously, they're not in any branch of Christianity. So you can kind of wonder, why are they getting these weird messages about all these, the Hindus have all these gods, and where are they getting this stuff? That kind of thing.
For the record, I love Hank Hanegraaff.
I don't know this guy, but anybody named Bible Answer Man seems pretty legit. So look at him there.
Well,
he's good. Yeah.
He converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, so they kicked him off the radio because it was a evangelical radio platform he was on.
He's pretty good at apologetics.
Yeah, he's the one that actually got me started years ago, and he's the one who got me out of the fundamentalist mindset that I was stuck in for so long. Coming out of a Southern Baptist legalistic background, his challenges, I listened to him because I disagree with him about a lot of stuff, and just one day decided to kind of look at it objectively, and that's kind of when the brick started tumbling.
So just curious for the room, because I had this discussion actually a little bit of a Twitter spat not that long ago, but where do y'all rest in the cessation versus non-cessation camp?
That's interesting because I'm a Texas Baptist, which is kind of like traditional Southern Baptist, but so it's kind of cessationist in a bit, but I know personally I've had some spiritual experiences myself, which I don't really discuss the details of, but I think it is 100% legitimate that God does speak to people in dreams, visions, and that there are gifts of the Spirit that are still about. I've experienced it, and I'm not even of that charismatic persuasion.
Yeah. I know that I think Ron's in the sort of charismatic camp. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm totally open to the activity of the Spirit here and now. I think that's kind of the means by which we know who God is in our locations, wherever we are, is through the Spirit, the continuing activity of the Spirit. I wouldn't want to limit that to, especially to do with gifts of that Spirit, to a certain time. I think the arguments for that are pretty bad.
I'm a bit of a skeptic towards it. I'm not. I'm kind of agnostic on it. I don't like to tell people who believe that they have had an experience or a communication or something that they haven't, because I'm not them, and would never be, so was presumptuous to do that. So I kind of don't really say much about it, because who knows, maybe I'll get smacked one day with it. So
what's so funny with me though is I came out of atheism, and like I'm like a huge skeptic, and it's happened to me, and like it's kind of one of those things that you kind of have to experience it, and if you don't experience it's very difficult to explain.
Yeah. I mean, we're told repeatedly to test all things and to make sure they're of the same Spirit. And in my understanding, I'm skeptical properly of most claims of gifts of the Spirit. Right. I don't think. I don't just accept all of them. But it's like a quick example is recently, I was actually called to give a sermon like an hour after morning service for the evening service. But I didn't have a message or a sermon prepared. But I happened to walk up to my wife and one of her friends talking at the end of church, and she was talking about what she called a vision. Yeah. And the vision involved what it involved, and what I knew at that point was my wife had a dream that was like the same thing. And then my friend also gave me a set of scriptures that she felt that the Spirit had led her to. And so I took all that in, and I went and researched the Spirit or the scriptures to see if there was a coherent message. And what I found was a coherent message. And so I built that sermon off of those scriptures and what they were both agreeing upon, because I felt that it was a message from the Lord.
Hey, Ronald, I had a quick question. Since you would know about this, do you think these types of experiences tend to be more prevalent in new believers, like when you first come to Christ, than like, say, someone who's been in the faith for a while? Or is it sort of across the board with that?
I would speculate that it probably is. I think it just depends on the person's, what I would say, availability. And I think a new believer would probably be more available. I mean, for me, when I came into Christianity, I've examined Scripture, and I felt like the gifts of the Spirit were not cut off in Scripture. Mm-hmm. And then so I had already accepted that God was real and that Jesus was Lord. So why start cutting off cutting it off? Why start limiting it? And then I started experiencing it too.
Who is me? Someone's joining named me. Assuming that's you.
But I just want to spice things up a little bit here.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Let's say you run into a Buddhist from Vietnam, say, or let's say from Vietnam, what do you say to them about their religion? And do you think there's something immediate about? Do you think they should immediately consider Christianity and take it very seriously? And what happens if they don't, kind of thing? I mean, what kind of conversations did you have with that Buddhist in Vietnam?
Was that to me, or
Just everyone.
I'd like everybody to take a shot at it if possible, but you know.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I would try to get to know them for who they are. If I'm meeting someone, I'm not just going to immediately launch into some sort of theological discussion with them. I would want to know who they are. And I mean, this is where problems of like evangelism come in, where I think we can be set up in a way that our primary disposition is just to get people to agree with us. I don't think that's where we go. I think we just need to initially get to know people for who they are and value them as human beings. That's our primary role, is to form friendships with people. So I don't even know when potentially I would enter into a discussion about religious faith with them. I just don't know. I can't tell anyone in advance how I would do that. I would just want to get to know them. And that's, as a pastor, that's just how I interact with everyone, is just to get to know them.
If I can jump in on that for a second. So having been an international traveler, I can definitely say that viewpoint is probably more an American cultural viewpoint, where we have this kind of like apprehension to not want to offend people, right? And so while that definitely has its place, and I'm with you in the sense of like, realistically and practically, you may not dive into the conversation. At the same time, I want to do Mark's question a proper service and not just dismiss it outright and say that like,
I wasn't dismissing it. Yeah,
I'm not saying you are. I'm just talking for myself for a second. I'm saying that my observation culturally is that a lot of other cultures like wouldn't mind having that conversation up front.
Yeah.
And so in that context, like, you know, I do speak to people from the Asian parts of the world, and they're actually like pretty upfront about wanting to just have the conversations outright, regardless of their particular faith. So in terms of like tying that into your question, I would say that I would probably begin, instead of like going down the evangelism side to start, is first understanding like, tell me what you understand about Buddhism, and just kind of get that elevator understanding from what they think and use that as a potential segue to introduce Christianity. I would want to understand first as best I can, but at the same time, not miss the opportunity to want to evangelize.
Yeah, I think if I could add something.
Just to defend myself a little bit, which is what I was getting to, is that I'm fine with talking about those things if they arise organically in a conversation with somebody. That's fine. I don't want to force that conversation with anybody. And I'm sure, given your experience internationally, that I believe you, that those conversations do come up quite a bit, and that would be fine, and I would be happy to engage with those. What I'm saying is my primary disposition, the way that I go into those conversations, is not primarily to convince somebody that Christianity is true. It's to get to know them as a person first. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. I'm more about building relationships and allowing things to come up organically. I don't believe that the way a lot of people evangelize is even biblical. When I talk to people about Christ, it is someone who is inquiring, or someone who I have a relationship with, because just as easy as one is open to it, another one, you immediately put the wall up if you don't have that relationship and they're not open to hearing anything. So I'm with you all the way. I don't do the going out and talk about Christ every chance I get, because I don't believe that's how we're supposed to do it. I'm more about loving people and being the example and letting them know why I love people.
Yeah, and if I could add something real quick, it's kind of like the way I see evangelism is definitely like more about situations like we're doing right now. Like I think this is like really cool. Yeah, we're most of us are Christians for sure, but like people can see this conversation and be like, man, that's really cool. Like I'd love to be a part of a group like that or whatever, and like they could be interested or whatever, and just getting your mind going, because it's not, I'm not trying to convince you, because shoot, for all I know, I'm like wrong on so many theological points. I don't really probably want to convince you of what I believe, but but yeah, I don't really like think of it that way. And I just know, especially before I was a Christian, like if someone did that, I put my guard up and I shut down. And I'm not saying everybody's that way. I definitely think we need to be different ways, because some people need that little push, and that's what, like, they're just stuck in this dumb mindset or whatever. And I'm not saying like atheism is dumb, but just like whatever, people get stuck in any sort of mindset, a dumb Christian mindset, you know, whatever. I'm not, but, and they need a little somebody to like push them, like you need to really think about this or whatever. And some people need that, but for a lot of people, I think too, like me, and I think all we can really do is like try and reach out to people that we like understand, and whether that's people similar, or maybe you understand people that are different or whatever. But I feel like I understand people that are similar to me, and it's things like this that I see this conversation, I'm like, man, I'm just listening to these people, and before I know it, it gets my gears going, and I want to be a part of it, and I want to learn or whatever. So that's like kind of the way I think about it. It's less about like pushing my ideas, and if someone asks me questions, I'd love to answer them. And I think for someone like myself too, when I would ask people questions and they just give me an answer, I'm like, all right, is this what Christians are all about? They're just about answering questions that they really don't even know. And even like you said, Ruben, at the start when you were talking about your channel, like you don't want to be like an armchair theologian or whatever, where you just like Googled a million answers. Nathan Orman brought up a thing about philosophy, which is similar. I mean, obviously philosophy and theology are similar, but about how like theology is like essentially turning into like Pokemon, where everybody just goes around and like collects all these different arguments and then uses them in battle or whatever. And that's like how theology turns into, and I think that's just terrible. Like I see that, and I'm
That's
like,
a
okay,
great analogy, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. I saw it on Twitter. I was like, that was really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the kind of the way I think about it. Just to like either, whether it's like a relationship one-on-one with somebody and just building that friendship, or it's like group settings where you're just like have an open environment where people can ask questions and see other people who are like searching for the truth and just love to like talk about things and understand things. Like that's the way I see it. Less about just convincing. I'm not really, it's not up to me to convince somebody. That's God's job. That's the way
that's
I
the
think
key.
about it.
That's the key. That's the key, is that recognizing and trusting that God's Spirit, Christ's Spirit, is ahead of us, potentially planting certain seeds in front of us, and we're responding to that. We're not initiating any of this. We're responding to it. We're participating in it. That's incredibly important. Incredibly.
I agree with all. I agree with everything that's been said, established. And I think 9 times out of 10, effective evangelism is going to be what I would say is the list of the fruit of the Spirit, to display that and walk it out towards people. And it's where people to see that, and then they'll see that something's different about you, and then they'll ask you why you're so weird, and you can say, let me tell you about Jesus. But as far as that specific question, I want to actually kind of get into it a little bit. With all that established, evangelism, I think, is a one-on-one thing, and it's getting to know a person and actually seeing people and taking an interest in them, seeing them as human beings in the image of God that may be buried under some sort of dirt or something that's there, scars and dirt. The image of God is there. We need to see that. Okay, so we need to have the eyes of Christ to see that. But with all that established, if I were talking to someone of another faith, like a Hindu or a Buddhist, I am of the opinion that I don't have to deny their spiritual experience. In my opinion, the spiritual experience that they're having is true. It's just incomplete. I think that I recently found out that C.S. Lewis took this approach. I came to this approach. It's not that all religions are completely false. It's that Christianity has the truth, and all the others have some truth, but not all of it. And so I can have a conversation about their spiritual experiences. And with all the other previous things mentioned, established, maybe offer Christian understanding or interpretation of those spiritual experiences, and have, during this relationship or development, guide them towards the truth that I have seen it, the more wholeness of truth that I've seen in Christ.
Yeah, I was just going to say that kind of like John and really the rest of you were saying that I would, of course, you don't want to just like hit them with the gospel, but yeah, like talk to them, get to know them. And, there's things like, where do you think the universe came from? What is your view of life after death? And, oh, okay, well, I'm actually a Christian, and we look at it, so, I mean, I would just kind of spark their interest. And I would want to say that I'm a Christian, and, kind of work it into the conversation if it goes that route and everything. And, I found it's really effective to ask people like, what do you think the origin of the universe is? What happens to us after we die? These big questions, and then say, oh, okay, well, I'm a Christian, and, see if the conversation can go from there.
Yeah, Hayden in the chat is definitely pushing back on us, and I told him to join, but he doesn't seem to want to. But
he's pushing.
No,
yeah, I'll give you an example.
I think the one thing to be mindful of, right, and I think that it's safe to say that all of us in this kind of virtual room is that we are definitely like making a point to be active in our expression of Christianity. And in that sense, I would say that at the core, that's the important part of evangelism is don't like put our light under the bed, right? So to speak. Mm-hmm. And in that context, like I would say I make it a point to try to be mindful of the fact that there are what would be coined the term churchians, right? Which are those that like try to check the box on what they think of Christianity. They get saved and then all of a sudden they stay in their comfortable life. And in that sense, like, are they really like serving Christ at all? And then there are those of us that feel called to like express our faith openly and publicly in whatever way that is. And while I definitely agree that if maybe one of the angle was we all feel a mutual awkwardness of the street preacher with the megaphone, so to speak, and that may not be like the way that brings people, that's kind of the honey vinegar argument per se. I would definitely say that we are feeling our calling mutually in the sense of we've got to say something about it, right? And I think Penn Jillette made a very like eye-awakening statement when I heard him in an interview once where he's like, how much do you have to hate a person to like claim you're Christian and then say nothing about your faith to somebody that you know is not a Christian, right? And that's eye-opening, right? Because I think too many people seem to be too worried about like offending somebody by just saying something, and maybe we don't want to like hit them over the head with the argument or the conversation, but at some point like there's some way where we have to like be proactive in injecting the conversation at some point. Would you all
when
agree?
I was first
can say something for sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
When I was first a Christian, I was a lot more like the first year and a half, I was a lot more evangelical. Like really, really like every sentence I'd go like, oh, you should come to my church. Oh, and I'd try to loop it back to Christianity. And then eventually I got tired of doing that. I mean, almost everybody knows you're a Christian. So the less you do, the better, because like it's part of who you actually are. And then things arise organically that, people can ask you questions that may be what they're legitimately curious about, like when you get to know people, you get to actually know them. And there are things that they might be attracted to about Christianity that you would have no idea. And the only way you can know that is by, honestly engaging with people. And then the fact that you're Christian just kind of organically flows out of you. It's not something you have to like consciously push on people. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Can we talk about Hayden's question in the
Yeah, exactly.
chat?
That's what I was about to say.
Why
He's
is that
like
good?
ranting in the chat.
I think he's
What's he doing?
I think he's completely wrong about Paul.
He's saying
totally
that Paul
wrong.
is like much closer to a street preacher than like, and we're all just
From
like
the
most
act-
of what we're saying
from-
comes from Americans don't talk about religion and politics
No.
and stuff like
no.
I
that.
literally just said, no.
Yeah. No. Paul, we have Acts data, which presents Paul as being a sort of street preacher in some verses, right? The historicity of Acts is a separate question that I would be happy to talk about at some point. But what we get from the epistolary data that we have from Paul himself is that he was not operating that way. We have him with the Thessalonians working with his hands upon his arrival, working alongside people, getting to know them. Any sort of critical biographical work that we do on Paul will show this. any sort of account of the ancient world and missionary activity shows that when somebody arrived in an ancient city, they couldn't just stand on the street corner and start preaching. They needed to have connections with people. Otherwise, they would die. Ancient cities were quite hostile. There was no guarantee that you would actually be safe unless you had connections with people, unless you had friends in those various cities. So Paul was constantly exploiting different networks of relationship throughout the ancient world, which you can get from, as I said, biographical reconstructions of this from his epistolary data. And what you find is that Paul is making friends constantly. And that's how he gets connected to the different networks. Yes, Paul thinks that sharing Christ is of primary importance, of course, but the way that you do that is a separate question, right?
Paul actually said, "I become all things to all people,
That's
so that I might
exactly
win
right.
some." So,
Exactly,
and
Craig.
his
It's
his
exactly right.
methodology of interaction was to break bread and bond with people
That's
first.
exactly right.
Then in
Yep.
a forum where it was like a public sphere, just kind of like what we do. If I'm in a
Yep.
debate, I debate. If I'm
Yep.
having someone on my channel, I ask them questions and try to establish rapport. If I'm at a bar and it's just not appropriate to the context. You go, "Hey man, how are you? Where are you at?"
Yep.
And you have a conversation with someone. Then if they say, "Look, I'm really hurting and thinking about God," you go, "Well, what a coincidence. I happen to be a Christian." You know,
Yes.
then
Right.
you
Yeah.
put it into the conversation. If it
That's
comes up.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And you see,
Yeah,
Paul,
go ahead.
Paul is active in the agora or agora, how you say that. But but that's the culture, right? But also what I think is important, and I recently started doing this led Bible study over Isaiah. What's interesting is, and you talk about the street preacher, and I think where a lot of this gets lost is, of course, Isaiah and all the prophets are admonishing the Israel from the Lord and saying, "Turn back, and you're making mistakes," and all that. But they're very harsh, and you get a lot of street preachers who think they're going to model that as godly. But the thing that you've got is the prophet, and the times that I think we can see where Paul is more aggressive is they're talking to people who should know. They're talking to people who have already agreed to be God's people and who have already agreed to the covenant in the Old Testament. They've already agreed to be God's people, and they know what they've agreed to, and they're not holding up to it.
Well said.
Well, at some point, somebody mentioned like the question of where do you go when you die. So that leads me to that kind of inspires a question like, would you ever tell this Buddhist from Vietnam, your soul is in jeopardy if you don't accept Christianity, or is that inappropriate?
Well, you know my answer.
I think it's inappropriate.
At that specific time, yeah, 'cause I'm the one that mentioned that. No, that's kind of like in conversation, and it's like what I said. I would say, "Oh, okay, well, I'm a Christian," and and like working into the conversation if it goes that route.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. Yeah, I think we hit.
I mean, I can elaborate if you want.
No, not you. Yeah, particular. I think that was pretty good. I don't know if I have anything to add necessarily.
Was expecting Craig to kick in.
Yeah, Craig had some good points for once, I think. No, just kidding, Craig.
It happens. Even a broken clock is right. Twice a day.
Here's my.
You threw it out there as kind of a zinger, Mark, but I guess like if I wanted to apply a little bit of a realistic scenario lens to that, I mean, if I already knew the guy was a Buddhist, like maybe we'd established that, and he happened to tell me he was like close to death, like he was, let's just say, diagnosed with something, and I hadn't up until that point taken the opportunity to talk about Christ at all, I probably would at that point, because if I cared about this person at all, I would absolutely want the opportunity to be used by the Spirit to express the gospel of grace, right? So I would definitely like use that as an opportunity to seize the moment, so to speak, because I think that's one thing we have to be, I'll speak for myself, that's one thing I have to be mindful of as a Christian, is also be aware of like that in the now moment. And that could be my in the now moment of evangelizing. Like I would know it when I feel it, probably is the best answer as a nuance. But at the same time, I also wanted to indulge your hypothetical and try to add my own spin on the practicality of it.
And yeah, that's actually a good point. There are times that I do feel prompted, if I guess by the Spirit to speak to some people, it's sometimes I would say it's the Spirit because, sometimes it's just from nowhere comes this prompting to, talk to someone about it. But I kind of approach it a little different. I believe that God is a just God. People will be judged according to their heart and their knowledge. I don't think that people necessarily have to know about Jesus to be saved. Now, that's not to say that I won't talk to them about Jesus, given the dire circumstances you're talking about. I would be motivated to speak to them about it. But as far as Buddhists and things of that nature, I don't believe that people are, going to be condemned for their lack of knowledge. So just kind of a different perspective where I come from.
Can I push back real quick? Just putting on a different hat. Different hat.
Travis is all about the hats, the atheist hats.
Different hat. Romans 1:18-32 says that everyone knows. Everyone has knowledge of God. They're without excuse. I'm not committing to this. I'm just saying that some people would appeal to that and say everyone actually knows. There is no one without knowledge, which is why people are culpable. So I'd be curious about how you respond to that.
Yeah, that would go along the lines of what I was saying. God knows the heart and the motivations and the person, and God is just. Let's say, for example, a Buddhist grows up a Buddhist their whole life, and they worship how they were taught to worship. They may feel that they're worshiping or, giving praise to something higher. I don't think that they would be condemned because they weren't able to hear about Yahweh or Jesus, that they were humble enough to know that there was more to life than what there is. But ultimately, in the end, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about who's going to be saved and who's not, because I believe God is a just God, and he knows their hearts. He knows who deserves to be there and who doesn't, and I'll leave it to him.
I think C.S. Lewis actually made a great illustration on that point in Narnia, the Narnia Chronicles. At the kind of spoiler alert, I suppose, but at the end, in the last battle, one of the I can't remember their names, but one of the other guys who worshiped the other god, Tosh, he meets Aslan in the paradise, and he says, "Well, I've dedicated my life to Tosh, and I was loyal to Tosh." And then Aslan says, "You think you were loyal to Tosh, but see, Tosh is not this way, and you've acted this way. You were actually serving me." So there's that possibility. But as far as evangelism, I'm not personally, because the thing I read in the gospel is not, there is some mention of the after, but it's not the main point. So I don't think it would be my main point of evangelism. And that's my understanding of it. But also, I think that Eddie makes a great point. Ultimately, God is a just God, and he will judge he will be just in his judgment. So there's that too. And if it were a dire situation like Ruben brought up, I would be more probably compelled to bring it up, but I would follow the prodding of the Spirit, so to speak.
If they weren't in dire circumstances, I think a Hindu would be someone of that kind of faith would be a good person to talk about Michael Heiser and the Divine Council. That might be an interesting place to go with it.
No,
that's the place that I come from. I mean, that's my understanding of spirituality, my experience of it. That's what I was mentioning earlier, is I don't have to deny their spiritual experience.
Yeah, I definitely think that's powerful. Not having to say like, "Oh, you were wrong," like a lot, but just that like, okay, let's think about this, and maybe you were misunderstanding something or whatever, or there's like a different way to looking at things or whatever. Not even necessarily misunderstanding, just that like there's a different way to look at this or whatever. It's definitely powerful. But as far as this Romans 1 thing, I would like to hear more people, because I'm pretty much like, I've struggled with this, like, for sure. Like, I never wanted to say, like, I don't believe Romans 1 or whatever, but, like, when I talk to someone, I don't want to say that everyone knows that Jesus rose from the dead 2,000 years ago or whatever. That seems ridiculous to me, that, like, people actually know that or whatever. And then coming to meet John and understanding his views, so I'm not even going to talk about it yet, because that's why he's, like, putting on a different hat or whatever. We don't have to talk about that right here, but I'm curious how other people would answer that question yet, because I think it's definitely tough. Like, how do we think about everyone like being responsible since they actually do know or whatever? And like, how, I mean, some people are flat out say like there's no such thing as an atheist or whatever, and I just think that's like ridiculous.
Well,
I used to be one.
Think, yeah, me too. I think I had a response to that. So they're out without excuse, but I also think that we can see that God has written his laws on people's hearts, which we can say is a conscience, which I do believe there is a universal conscience. And so we go back to what C.S. Lewis's illustration is. If they're following the good, which is the good, they have to be following the God because he is the good. And so I think that's my counter to that. To a degree.
Yeah, but the text also says that some of them reject it and suppress it specifically and don't. Some of them are in trouble and they deserve death in that text for knowing.
I think that's true.
Okay.
So my point on that would be that's kind of why I'm a hopeful universalist and not quite a universalist, is I think that I'm an annihilationist too. I don't believe in eternal torment. I'm not even sold on the idea of hell. The more research I do about the original Hades and Sheol, but that aside, I think that the condemnation or the lack of gift of eternal life with Christ is more of an open rebellion. I take it as those that are actively against God or openly rebellious to God are the ones that condemnation, if there is reserved for.
I think Romans 1 is like a fine-tuning argument, to be honest. I don't think it's a presuppositional argument. I think it's more of a fine-tuning argument from nature. You can tell by the things around you that there's this God.
Yeah, that you can make a reasonable inference.
Yeah.
We had this conversation.
Perking up for sure. This is where he like severely disagrees.
Sorry, John.
How my dad described it years ago in like real terms was like we were Catholic, but one time we were having a conversation around the dinner table. Do you believe in God? And my father was like, I do, because I see things like mountains and like sunset, and that's a lot of like most people's natural inference. Like there's got to be some reason for this, for purpose for me being here. Something created this. This can't just be a random, cosmic accident. That's what I kind of think it's inferring, that there's a certain reasonable, like even when I was an agnostic, I noticed that I would have conversations with God.
Yeah, I could push back on that a little bit if I could, just real quick. Like, I would push back because, like,
I don't think you can.
Yeah, I could try at least. But I think if you told Paul that, like, oh, I believe that there's this, like, creator of all the trees or whatever, he would look at you and, like, basically call you an atheist. Like, I don't think he would use that word, but, like, just believing in this, like...
Right, well, I don't think he meant... I agree with what you said. I don't think he literally meant everybody knows the risen Christ. He meant, like, when
I don't know.
when
I
you-
think it's pretty powerful that might be what the text is saying. Is kind of like
Uh,
pretty interesting.
no,
I don't see that. But
I disagree with that too. I don't think it's talking specifically everyone knows about Christ. I would say it's more that God Himself has made it known that He exists.
I was
There
just
are
Yeah,
gonna
but,
say,
Yeah.
sorry, but
Well-
that's enough culpability to deserve death in that text. It's enough to deserve death in that
Yeah, it
text
seems
and to
pretty
not be included. I mean, it's pretty clear about that. Yeah,
Right,
I'm not sure how you get around that.
I wanted to add my perspective from my former atheist lens versus my current Christian lens. And, when I was an atheist, I was real big on drinking that excuse Kool-Aid to disavow the Romans passage and stating that, like, oh, there's so many people groups that don't know, and if God's just God, like, He can't condemn all these people, and what about the Aborigines and blah 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 and all this other kind of stuff. And then, like, after I became a Christian, like, it was so strongly on my heart, like, giving me my own personal revelation of that I was actually in denial when I was an atheist and not firmly in this, like, true belief system that nothingness is the truth and God is the lie. You know what I mean? And so in that context, that's where I fully support the Romans passage and have taken it as, yeah, it's self-evident that there is an awareness that God is the creator of all things. There is the unmoved mover. And in that context, that's where I am totally in agreement, in the sense of, like, everybody is without excuse. Everybody deep down knows that we are a created being from a created intelligence. And when you start there, then you kind of owe yourself the due diligence to, like, deep dive into that introspectively, if nowhere else. And if you don't do that, then you're doing a disservice. Ergo, you're also doing a service to God. Right.
And it kind
Yeah,
of
I think
reminds me of when-
Ruben's being consistent. I think y'all are adding stuff into the text. I think Ruben is actually being quite consistent there.
Yeah, but what about when Paul tells them about
Y'all are
the
qualifying things, which is not actually justified by the data we have.
Hold on. If we're going to take it at face value in a literal reading, well, then we could take a lot more that there's no conditions under which humanity is required to be saved, such as Christ died for all men. So once we start applying the literal principle like that to a single verse, if we apply it to all the verses, there's far more that have less stipulations for being saved than that one.
You're getting it, Eddie.
Hallelujah.
You're getting it. That's the point.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, and I wanted to say that the Muslim could look at the mountains and the rivers and the trees and say, yeah, I believe in God, yet he's not a Christian. So, that gets to the issue of whether or not what Paul is saying in Romans speaks to the modern day Muslim or even the modern day.
Yeah, but at
Jew.
least there it's an Abrahamic God, right? So it's kind of one of those where we got to start with a baseline, and they're kind of there. We're just hoping for more, kind of thing. So,
what I would
Travis
say
can
about
go.
that.
Yeah, and then I'll go. I'm going after
Yeah.
Travis.
Okay, just real quick, because I'm kind of the one that mentioned it at first. What I would say is that it is making, like, sort of a teleological, even an argument from beauty, perhaps. And I think I would also apply kind of like a reformed epistemology, like a properly basic belief. And I think that's what's coming together, is that, you see this in nature, there's something out there, and you have this internal awareness of God, and that you're either in right or wrong relationship with that. And
yeah, I agree with that, actually.
It kind of reminds me of, like, when Paul was talking about, the unknown God, when he was trying to evangelize. They knew God, for in him we, have our being, and so forth. And he was actually talking about their pagan literature. So that's just my thought.
That's if you're trying to tickle my fancy, you are, with talking about reformed epistemology. That's kind of my jam.
Yeah, I would just push. I just want to say, like, push back on, like, this whole idea that, like, all Paul is appealing to there is, like, the unmoved mover, or just this, like, unnamed creator or whatever. Because, like, I don't see how, like, knowing that like it seems pretty easy to follow this like unnamed creator that just makes trees and mountains, but doesn't act like. I don't see why that implies any sort of like moral law, or like even like Mark said, I could be
Well,
a
he said it.
Muslim
He
or
said-
a Hindu or anything.
Right, but he said it when he was saying there's an implied like argument from beauty in there. I thought what he said was actually on point. There is some responsibility to get yourself into right relationship with this. Like, and it's a little bit even what the other guy said, that it's arguing that it's self-evident to some degree, and what you do with that awareness is up to you.
Yes,
and
I
there
disagree.
is-
Yeah.
Doesn't say that. It actually
Well-
says, "For the wrath of God is revealed against heaven, against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who hold the truth in unrighteousness." They're rejecting the truth at that point.
Yeah.
So either you have to go Reuben's direction on this, or you can come along to my side.
Yeah.
Or-
And you basically
If you
take
go-
that as like a reductio
And then you don't
ad
have to revise
absurdum,
the text.
essentially.
Yeah.
Well, if you go to verse
Wait,
28,
I wasn't sure that I was disagreeing with you. I think I'm trying to align with you as close as I can. That yeah, we are without excuse. I agree with that.
Oh no, I'm actually I said earlier I don't agree with that. I actually reread Romans 1-3 rhetorically very differently. I'm just saying that the text says what it says. Exegetically, it says what it says, and I think you actually have the most consistent position on this. I think it's doing something else rhetorically and theologically than
So-
I think most people have sort of realized.
Well, John,
It's setting up. So if you want me to give a brief summary of this, which may be helpful.
And you have another
Paul is-
video all on this too that you could.
I
point
do.
people
I
to.
do. I have
Yeah.
2 other videos on this. Yeah. Rereading Romans 1-3 in the light of Douglas Campbell's work, who's a scholar at Duke, which is where I did my master's studies at. Romans 1:18-32 is actually an opponent's position. It says what it says. The text says what it says, but it's actually an opponent. It's the same opponents that are actually at Galatia at this point. So Romans and Galatians are biographically, if we can reconstruct that sort of accurately, written around the same time. They're referring to the same opponents. Romans, later on in Romans, you have a reference to these other, this other sort of missionary group in view. So Romans 1:18-32 is an opponent's position. And then in 2:1 and following into chapter 3, Paul is actually reducing that initial position from his opponent to absurdity, which makes beautiful sense of Romans 2. And it actually addresses some of the problems that traditionally in Roman scholarship has been ignored or kind of overlooked, which is you actually have righteous pagans running around saved by works in Romans 2. People are saved by their works in that text. People don't really know what to do with that. And then you get to chapter 3 and you have an explicit diatribal structure. You have an argument going on, which is Paul continuing that argument. So that's a rhetorical point. It's not an exegetical point. So I'm saying the text says what it says. Reuben's actually quite consistent. I just don't want to add stuff into the text, which I think is what some of y'all are doing.
Okay, well-
we're actually adding stuff into the text. It's not there.
John, how would that not apply to, like I said, like a reformed epistemology, where there is evidence, in creation and in beauty and so forth, and there's also that inner awareness where it's both. So I don't see it as either or, like more of like both and.
well,
Sorry, can you rephrase that?
I think
real
I
quick?
could say one thing and then you could rephrase, but just that'll kind of help. And I think like less of John's like disagreement is on like I think he like your conclusions line up more with like what Craig and Travis and Ron are saying.
Oh, sure.
But you're like you're
Oh,
just
yeah,
pointing out
absolutely.
that like, hey, you're not getting this from the text. Essentially,
I think Reuben's reading the text more
Yeah.
closely and exegetically, sort of rigorously. I think there's just something else going on rhetorically there, which leads me to agree with y'all ultimately.
Yeah,
about
so it's
who
funny.
God
You
is,
like
how God
agree.
interacts with the world.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
agree with the people. But
So I'm in this
like,
weird spot of
yeah.
agreeing with both kind of
basically disagree with everybody.
positions. Yeah, yeah.
That brings up a question I have then. This is going to be more provocative than I think, but which is, John is reading Romans, and trying to get as much context and knowledge from it as possible. But what if someone says, you know what, Paul's just wrong about a lot of things. So he didn't really see the risen Jesus. He thought he did, but he didn't really. And in other words, I guess because I'm the agnostic here, I'm going to ramp up my skepticism and say, what if what you're reading is just written by a guy rather than somebody who's really speaking for God? And so I guess what I'm asking is, convince me that, or maybe that's too difficult to do in a single live stream chat, but convince me that Paul really isn't just a guy writing some stuff down, which is interesting. Convince me that he's speaking for God.
Convince you that someone 2,000 years ago was speaking for God?
Yeah, because if he's just a guy, if he's just a human being, a fallible human being like I am, he has his writings. Well, I could write stuff down too. I mean, a lot of people, can write novels, books, whatnot. So in order to take seriously what John is saying, or even what Ruben's saying, or what any of you guys have said about Romans, I think it's presupposing that Paul is not just a guy.
Well, I want to add something to the Romans 1 debate. To me, now, I'm not Reformed or anything, so Romans 1 clearly, to me, speaks about choosing and the language of choice. And what I see from especially Romans 1:28 is that Paul is talking about those who know better and have chosen otherwise, sort of like what you see in Hebrews 6. That's how I see it.
I guess, Mark, what I would say is that I think when we look at history, what you can say is if something is historically consistent with who he said he was, I don't really know how we would prove that historically. I don't even know what you're really wanting in terms of evidence.
Yeah, I just don't think that to me, I would never want to convince someone to be a Christian by all right, let's look at Romans and convince you that this is an act. That's not the route. I think if you're not led by if your intuition is to be skeptical of the text, and there's nothing I can do at that point. I don't want to be such a nihilist or whatever that but it's just not. You have to have that. I know for myself, there was a point where I could read the Bible and it looked one way, and there's a point where it looked a different way, and I don't know how. I can't do that for you, essentially. And that's where I think why I'm pretty committed to and I definitely don't want to go into this a million times, but it comes up so much, but a universalist position, because it doesn't seem if it really is true that you have to be convinced to get into heaven, then there has to be a way to convince you, essentially, and I just don't see how that's possible. It seems if you're skeptical, I don't talking to you now, and I mean, maybe it comes down to one sin you committed in your life, or whatever, that just put you over the line, and maybe I'm wrong, but you know what I mean? Either way, it's just not the way it works or whatever. So and this goes back to the evangelism thing. I definitely think we talk about it, but if your intuition and your heart is not towards this being true, then I just don't. I can point out all the evidence I want, and I think I should, because it's pretty sad that if your heart is towards that way and I don't point out the evidence, then it sucks. You're left sitting over there and you would have believed, you know what I mean? But so I just try my best to explain the way I understand it. But if you're not, if it seems skeptical to you, then that's just, I don't know. There's nothing I can do to change your mind. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul is just a dude. He's a dude that feels that he was commissioned by God to be an apostle to the Gentiles. That's what he says. And as far as the data we have in Scripture, I think the other biblical authors probably think something similar about their role. In that, yeah, I'm fine to leave it at that. I'm not an inerrantist. I'm not someone who thinks there's some sort of like single author behind all of these texts in some sort of rigid causal way. I'm not saying that. I do think they're witnessing to a truth, which is Jesus, which is God's revelation of God's self in Jesus Christ. They're witnessing to that. But yeah, I'm fine with retaining the humanity of these texts because I think we need to. I think we actually, if we don't do that, then what's the point of historical analysis of these texts if they're not really just people at the end of the day, which they are.
Well,
so, yeah.
Even from the position of inspiration of the Spirit to write the text, you still have the human author involved. It's not just a dictation by the human author. I mean, it's inspiration through the human author using their tools and abilities as well. It's not just
sure. And I'm cool with that. I am cool with that. Yes. Yeah, I am cool with that.
And I'm not as strict inerrant as in the common sense. I think it's inerrant in its ability to reveal Christ in its purpose, which is, I think, is the whole purpose of the Bible is to reveal who Christ is, revelation of Christ. But I don't think it's inerrant. I don't take the common classic or whatever, not really classic, is very modern, inerrant view of every single solitary word is absolutely 100% true. The representation of every single thing that it talks about. I don't do that, but I think it's inerrant in its ability to reveal Christ.
Yeah, with inerrancy, I kind of go with like the message gets across that God wanted us to know. So I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Hayden's blowing up the chat.
Yeah, I know.
What's he saying?
Why didn't he just come on?
I don't know.
What's he saying?
He's busy. He does have a baby in his house, so it's probably easier to type than it is to.
Someone brought something up in the.
Yeah, I'm about to say there's been a lot. He blew it up too much. Come on now, Hayden.
Yeah. Well, as far as if I can digress back to the Romans 1 thing, which nobody probably agrees with me, but I do see the language of choice in what he's using in Romans 1 and what Paul is using. And I see that God is a just God and that he doesn't hold people account for things that they're ignorant of. So, he holds people for their individual sins, not sins of other people. That's how I see it. I think what's happening in Romans 1 is we're talking about, which kind of goes with what John's talking about. He's addressing another audience, like in Galatians. But we're talking about people who have every reason, who have knowledge of God, but have decided to reject it. That's my point.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree.
Amen.
And actually, Paul confirms that later on when he says, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance. So God holds you accountable for what you should know according to your talents and your intelligence and things like that, and what's been presented to you, not for things that you would have no way of knowing.
Okay. Yeah, I think we actually had a constructive conversation with 8 people in a room. That was pretty cool.
If Pine Creek showed up, I was gonna be like, hey, it's late.
We're not allowed to say that name on this show.
Yeah.
Hayden
I'm
called
just
me,
kidding. Just kidding, Pine.
Yeah.
I think Hayden called me I forget what he said, but he said something about me and Pine Creek. Anyway.
You're like a more reasonable version of Pine Creek, where you ask some leading questions that actually made the conversation move forward.
Notice I saved the most skeptical question for the end, though. Right?
I would like to ask. I'd like to ask Mark a question before I go.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
Mark, are you familiar with global skepticism versus local skepticism?
You said the same thing twice. I think you meant to say local versus global or whatever. I think you said local versus local.
No, I said global skepticism
Okay, I
versus
heard you
local
wrong.
skepticism.
Yeah, he said.
Yeah, I think I think I've
call
heard
him
those
out.
terms.
Yeah, nice try, Ethan. Gosh.
No, I think I've heard those terms before. So I think global skepticism means that I don't believe in any gods, and whereas local skepticism might mean I don't believe in, say, the Islamic God or Christian God. Is that right?
No, it's more most philosopher skeptics, such as Hume, are global skeptics. They're skeptics to pretty much everything. And one thing it tends to be prevalent these days, I'm not saying it's you, that's why I'm just wondering. People tend to have more of a local skepticism where they're only skeptic towards God claims or faith claims or things of that nature. Would you consider yourself just because I'm actually a global skeptic myself. It's I'm skeptical about lots of things. So I was just kind of curious of your mindset, if it was, you just were a skeptic by nature about everything, or if it's just more towards kind of a God claim.
I guess I might be more skeptical towards. I mean, I realize there's limitations to this, but I think I'm more likely to be skeptical of things that seem, first of all, unverifiable. I mean, it's like I can prove to you gravity by just kind of repeatedly dropping this pen and we all watch it fall to the ground. So, I can be a very, very confident in stuff like that. And then, of course, with history, you can't really repeat the trial more than once, and so there's limitations. So I guess I would try to I would try not to be hyper skeptical. I think there's real cost to being hyper skeptical, and I think there's also cost to being not skeptical enough. And I would try to apply it to. I would try not to be to apply too much skepticism to something like God or Christianity or Islam or Hinduism.
Well, yeah, well, I've already got a lot of respect for you because you consider yourself agnostic, and that's a huge leap because a lot of people are, pretty confident, and they're not believing, and you just don't seem to run across too many agnostics these days. Anyways, I would anybody that's listening that's skeptic, agnostic, atheist, or this, that, or the other, I would implore them to look into global skepticism versus local skepticism, because global skepticism is actually a pretty tenable position, but local skepticism isn't. We tend to be more hyper skeptic about, I'm not talking about you in particular. We tend to be more hyper skeptic about supernatural claims and things of that nature. I am too. It's I have to constantly remind myself that, if there is a God and he can create the universe, then resurrections, miracles, things of that nature isn't very hard to accomplish. So, but anyway, other than that, it's nice meeting you. It's nice meeting everybody else on here. I appreciate you having me on, Ethan.
No, yeah, thank you for coming by. Yeah, and definitely everybody, if you're watching this, you should check out Eddie's new channel he just started. It's called Brute Facts Podcast, and he's trying to get that off the ground, and it's pretty hard to get a channel off the ground. So if you're watching this, go subscribe to his channel. It's not that hard to just hit subscribe. So
Also,
you won't.
yeah, and if you do, then unsubscribe, but at least he had subscribed for a little while. Shoot.
right.
Hey Eddie, if you don't mind, put the link to your thing so I can subscribe.
Yeah, I put the link in the description of this video too. I put your channel, Ruben, and Eddie's, and John's in there. I don't think anybody else. Oh, I could put Craig's, but he's got more subscribers than me, so I'm not putting his in there. That's garbage. He's the best Christian YouTube channel there is, apparently.
I'm the biggest thing on here. I have like twice.
Coming after you, Craig. I'm coming after you.
Wait, are you?
What's
your channel growth? You'll probably start growing.
I'm just getting to 250. So
But you've
Yeah,
only
but
been
you,
going
like,
for
That's
just
better than
started.
Ethan.
Yeah.
I just started a couple months ago, so
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have a secret weapon. I'm on TikTok and growing like exploding.
Yeah, but John's
Oh.
leeching off all his wife's subscribers and people who like her or whatever.
Yeah, of
so-
course.
Right,
What do
and
you
he
mean?
gets all these like
Why wouldn't I
halfway
do that?
important people to come on his channel through
Yeah,
her.
wife privilege.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's right. White privilege.
What are you on TikTok, Craig? I'm on there too.
What's your thing? I'll find you. I don't even know what it's called. It's
Right until I can change it after my 30 days. It's Pasta's secret weapon.
Pasta secret weapon. All right, I'll find you.
It's like an inside joke that just doesn't
Yeah.
go over well with like people who don't know it.
Yeah, it's I didn't realize when you change it, you have to wait 30 days. So.
It's called something basic like Christian Response or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it's called.
But you guys be good.
Yeah, have a good one.
See you, man.
Hey, take care, man.
Take care.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to hit one last topic before we go or we want to just kind of end this here. We've been going for like an hour and a half, so it's kind of up to you guys what you guys want to do.
Well, I wanted to talk about a moment. Mark's last question about the inspiration, or maybe Paul's just wrong. He's just some dude.
Okay. Yeah.
I couldn't and wouldn't start with Paul. That's a much different discussion. We have to discuss a lot of other things about the Bible to get to where I got to trusting the Bible. And you can't start with Paul. I got a topic if anyone wants to take it on. Let's talk about sin.
Sin?
What is it?
Yeah.
I love sin.
Well, I've been listening to N.T. Wright's book, The Day the Revolution Began, and he's made a lot of good points. And I think there's a lot of things we've gotten wrong. Christians gotten wrong about talking about sin, and I think the way I understand it, I think that actually plays into understanding the truth of the Bible.
Are you getting out of here, Mark? Or I don't know if you waved or I didn't know what happened. Yeah, sorry.
That was me.
I was waving to Travis.
Okay, I realized that.
Because
As soon as I said
I
something,
gotta
you
go.
posted- Yeah. Okay. Well, it's nice. Yeah, it's nice having you on again, Travis, for
Yeah.
sure.
God
Yeah,
bless.
have a good
Take care.
But
Sorry,
Yeah, I
was
don't
a
know, maybe you
distracted.
could
Ron, can you summarize one more time what you're saying? You want to talk
Yeah.
about sin, right?
Yeah.
About it.
Well, it's common knowledge of it, which I've recently discovered. Common knowledge usually means you don't know anything about the topic. But the common knowledge or formulation, even from people, believers, of sin is it's a violation of moral dictates, which that's part of it, but it's not the main, I don't think, and it's probably not even the most important part of that discussion. Yeah.
what do you think is
Go ahead,
the
go
most
on.
important part? Yeah, I'd like to.
Yeah,
Okay.
please do.
Well, and NT, I'm a big fan of NT Wright. You guys may hate him, but I love him. But the thing about sin, and this is something else okay, let me get to the point. The thing about sin is the main sin, I think, that we see is turning from following God for Israel in the Old Testament. They have already agreed to follow God and to hold him as their God, and they fall into idolatry and falling away from him. So that's the main sin that, like in the second commandment, you got where it talks about not having idols, and then it says the sin of the father will be visited upon the son. And I had a Hebrew teacher that broke this out for me a little bit. I don't know if he's right, but he's a Hebrew teacher who reads Hebrew. But he said that what that actually means isn't that, and you talk about iniquity or sin, it's a singular, and that sin is turning away from God, turning away from the Lord. It's not all sins of the father are visited or put upon their children, but that the turning away from the Lord, that iniquity, singular, brings the Lord's visit onto the following generations to bring them back to him. And then you see in Judges, or not Judges, but Kings, successively, the kings the sins of the father and kings is not following the Lord, right? It's following into idolatry. And so the thing is we're created to worship God, to be images of God, to reflect his glory onto, to be his priests, to reflect him into creation, to reflect his glory, justice, all that onto creation, or in creation, to be his priests, his representatives. And I'm probably rambling, but so the thing about sin is we're not fulfilling our calling for that which we were created, which is to be his image on earth, and through that have proper dominion over the earth. I'll stop there.
So I don't know if there's a question there, but
yeah,
I think the simplest way I've tried to categorize sin, because I think sin is a very tricky word. It can get us tangled into a lot of nuanced conversation with the wrong people. So the biggest thing that I've looked at it is sin is at its base level disobedience against the nature of God, right? I mean, that's why Romans 5 kind of illustrates it, right? And so in that sense, when I personally relate it, I look at it this way: is the biggest gesture of love is us having ultimate sovereignty of free will. But also our biggest demonstration of love towards God is ultimate obedience towards him. And so whenever we choose our self-sovereignty over our obedience to love him, then we are sinning. And then it doesn't matter what it is, it all falls into that singular category.
Okay, that's the thing I just realized when you were talking. The thing about sin is it corrupts our actual humanity, the humanity of which we were created for.
Sure.
And it makes us not human, right?
Not human?
Not human. It actually corrupts us to the point of being not human, because Adam, or Jesus, the second Adam, was created to be image bearer of God with proper dominion over the earth in God's image. But when we have sin, we're corrupted from our true humanity, and by Jesus we come back to true humanity.
Okay.
Being fully human. And this is N.T. Wright's formulation, is that when we reject God or reject Christ, that we're actually rejecting being fully human, being full human, embracing or becoming full humanity.
Yeah, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I have to go soon, but I think what's missing here is actually the fundamental issue with sin. And it has nothing to do with what we introduce by way of transgressing into the cosmos. It's actually a power. So this is where we get Paul helping us out. It's a power that exerts some kind of force on us that enslaves us, and it's tied up with death and the flesh in Paul. It's something that's holding us captive and getting in the way of our relationship with God that has been established from before all ages, right?
Yeah.
That's really the fundamental problem, is that enslavement to this power, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus enters into that power, assumes it, dies, it's executed and it's buried and done away with, and then resurrects out of that situation. So sin is actually much more horrifying, I think, than we tend to think about it. It's
I
really
actually agree
something
with
that's
that.
taken up. Yeah, it's actually something that's taken up residence in our flesh.
Yeah.
It's harming us from within and also from without. And we
But
need.
that's
what
like
we
almost a
need-
normal theological interpretation.
Yeah, and of course.
But it's not usually expressed that way.
Yeah. What we need in terms of a solution is not some sort of response to transgressions or whatever you may think in that vein. We actually need a new operating system. We need to be transformed and healed
Yes.
and delivered from this problem. That's really the solution that God gives us in Christ and through the Spirit.
Yeah.
So
new
the problem is
creations in
really,
Christ.
really, really horrifying. And we can't handle this stuff on our own. We need Jesus to assume it and conquer it in his death, burial, and resurrection. So it's
So you start living for the spirit as opposed to living in the body of sin and living for the demands of the body.
yeah.
That's
so sin's
actually
it's
actually
a power.
That's
Yeah,
all biblical.
It's a power.
Well, that is something that Bright points out too. I left
I
that
think
off. is
I don't think he quite
that-
he doesn't center it in the way that I would want to. Right.
Well, he
I think
says that
that's
we-
the
we-
fundamental point about sin. Yeah. Which is where
Well,
I would
he-
actually disagree with, right? Yeah.
Well, he says that we turn over our God-given position and authority over to other forces whenever we don't worship the true God.
Right. So my point is that it's not the result of a choice we make. This is something that's
Yeah.
exerting power on us prior to any choice that we make to be involved with it or not.
Well,
we can
but
collaborate with it through the choices we make, right?
Yeah, at this point,
Yeah, but it's
this
not
point, the
something
world
that we
is corrupted
choose,
at
and it
that point,
right, exactly. The cosmos
it's
is in bondage, right? Romans 8, it's in bondage to
Right,
decay.
but people even have a secular understanding of this. Like people talk about you're enslaved to your passions. When you're an alcoholic, you're enslaved to alcohol. You're a creature of your habits and your whims and your passions. And if you don't have they control you to a certain degree, and everybody sort of notices that even outside the context of Christianity.
Yes, right. What I'm saying is it's cosmic in scope. The whole cosmos is enslaved. It's in bondage, right? It's not just individual people. It's the entire thing. So that needs to be liberated, and that's what Christ does.
That's exactly the point. Is we make it too small, right? We want to talk about individual sins and individual salvation, which are important, of course, but it's not just God. Christ didn't come to just save people.
Yes,
he came to save all of creation.
It's the cosmos. Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Yes, the whole cosmos.
Totally right.
So and I think that's a bad formulation and a bad communication to say that sin is a matter of moral guidelines that were violated.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And totally. it undermines the touching of reality from the gospel.
Yes.
Because like what Craig was saying, what you're saying, I think this is a revelation of pattern of creation. We can see it in other ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of like religious people talk about it like it just means like cussing and stupid stuff that nobody actually cares about.
I think the addiction move is good because I think it also reveals something about our perception of sin too, right? So when you're going along let's say the 12-step program of AA, along the way, when you're still in the throes of addiction, you can't quite narrate your story to yourself in an accurate way. You need to go through the process of those 12 steps. And then you can get to a point.
Yeah, totally.
Through those steps to narrate your life accurately, right? I think the same thing happens for everybody involved with God. We need Christ to come and heal us and to show us what the sin we've been involved with actually is fully.
Right, because we don't even
can't
know
just know it like on our own.
We're in bondage to it without even knowing that we are.
Exactly right.
And like vaguely underneath, like before I was a Christian, I was really like vaguely underneath it. I had an awareness that I was being destructive, but it was
in
like,
some vague sense. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know it, but you're not capable of getting a handle on it just by yourself.
Yeah, right.
Restoring your agency without. Yeah. That's even what they teach you in AA. We admit that our lives have become unmanageable.
Oh, I know that process well. Mark?
Yeah, about to say Mark can go next.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Ruben's question because I think, let's see. I think, Ruben asked me what's my position about sin. And I think what I would say about that is, I've kind of done a little study of moral philosophy. And so I don't know if I believe in sin per se, but I do believe in something, called right and wrong. broadly speaking, right and wrong actions.
So you're a type of moral realist?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly.
Okay.
Now, granted, I struggle with the moral realism to some extent because I realize that, I guess I don't want to get too in the weeds about how I've struggled between the belief that morality is objective versus morality being purely subjective and so on. That's a very involved conversation. I've read both sides. I've read a little bit of both sides, and I kind of, each time I'm reading it, I can kind of get persuaded to that position that I'm reading about. But I mean, I do have an intuitive sense of what I think is right and wrong. At least I can say that.
Right.
I can at least say that I have an idea about, that the Nazis were wrong, that the person who volunteers at the soup kitchen is right, and so on. I have that intuitive sense. And I don't really feel like I can prove it in the same way that I can prove, that if I toss a rock into a lake, it's going to sink.
Right, because there's no empirical basis for that. It's more of a value judgment.
Yeah, I do. I would distinguish it from that. Although I've read Dr. Russ Schaefer Landau's books, a couple of his books on moral realism, and he says, it isn't necessary that you have this verification process in order to believe in something, right? Mm-hmm. And some atheists don't like that because they say, it's a slippery slope to believing in God,
Oh no!
Oh no! What are we gonna do? They caught us accidentally. They tricked us.
But anyway, so I don't know if I answered your question. If you want to follow up with that.
Weren't you going somewhere? Weren't you saying something else originally?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I don't know if I believe sin. I guess I would say if I believe in a secular version of sin, it would mean when you do something wrong. You know.
But you can even see like a secular version of sin, like being a slave to your passions. You're trying hard to you're addicted to like booze, and you're trying to stop and live right, and you just don't. You can't without establishing some type of moral agency wherein you can actually live correctly. Like there would be a way to describe that in secular terms. What John was talking about is my only point.
Addiction is a secular way of describing what you're talking about, I guess.
Yeah, I think an interesting point just to make, I don't know if I have too much to add to this, because I basically agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. I don't know exactly where the specifics, but I think an interesting point to add about the connection to addiction and speaking of it with a lot of the same language is this interesting fact that a lot of people look at addiction this is just a choice you're making or whatever, but it's really not. And that's pretty interesting the way that's similar to what a lot of people look at sin as just this small choice that you make, when in reality
it's not. It's more a whole relationship,
or whatever. And I think
so. What I want to qualify this though real quick, because what I don't want to say is that those who are addicted are the quintessential sinners. Which can be how that analogy is actually taken. So I just want to be clear publicly that it's not. I'm not saying that people
I don't think any of us
in the throes of addiction, but some people do. Because I've used this before in writing.
But
you
can easily see with the addiction analogy how a person.
So it's just an analogy. Yeah.
And all analogies are imperfect.
Right. Yeah.
But what you can see in the analogy of the addiction is that the person slowly becomes more and more corrupted. They become more or less and less themselves.
Right.
And, especially with drugs, like meth. I've known a lot of people with meth who've used meth.
Yeah.
People that use meth, they actually will eventually, a lot of them will eventually lose their conscience. I mean, they will have they will tell you they have no conscience, that their conscience completely is gone, and that they're just feeding that addiction, and they don't care what or who is in the way.
Well, and even in his wife had a stream on, is there an ontology to sin? And it was and they were analyzing Romans, and I thought it was actually a really good stream where it talks about it in these terms, and the Bible actually talks about it clearly like that. First, sin fully formed produces death. Even if cheating on your wife, you know, you get the impulse, you see like the hot woman, and then you yield to the impulse, and then the impulse.
Ooh. Did we lose Craig or yeah? You cut
Well,
out Craig, but yeah.
And he was just getting into the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to head out, y'all.
Yeah, I'm
but
gonna have to end.
Yeah,
This
I
was
gotta
really
jam
fun.
too.
Oh,
Great to
can
meet
I-
you, Ruben. Seriously.
Yeah, you too, man.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark, good to see you again.
Dude, this was fun,
Well-
Spartan. I hope you have these again. This would be
Yeah,
really
I will.
fun.
I will. These have been good. I think I've
Oh,
gotten a
yeah.
pretty good little group of people to join these.
Yep. See
I'd
y'all.
like to ask Mark a quick question if I can.
Sure, you can.
So that's what we've been talking about. Kind of covers more of personal sin, but how about? I don't know about you. I mean, I can't speak for you, but I've always had the feeling that the world isn't as it ought to be,
I agree with that.
and that's what John and I were going towards about the largeness of sin. It's larger than personal corruption and personal moral violations, and so it's the world is not as it's supposed to be, and that for me was one of the things, one of the seeds, or however you want to call it, of finding truth in Christianity, was the explanation of how the corruption of the world is, how it's not how it's supposed to be. It is not how it ought to be.
Sure. So I guess if I were to provide a non, I don't know, I guess an alternative explanation for why the world is the way it is I guess one option is that there's no one in charge. Is that if there is no God, then, and it's all just matter in motion, kind of changing and modifying over time in some, a random process, and then you have, take evolution for example. If you buy into evolution and natural selection, you kind of understand. I think you can sort of get an understanding as to why human beings are selfish, greedy, lustful. I mean, to take the lust as the simplest way to go is to look at lust and say, well, those human beings that didn't lust after the opposite sex, they didn't reproduce as much, and therefore we're the descendants of those human beings that really did have a sexual appetite. So I mean, you can look at things in that way and say, that's why we have a world kind of as it is. I mean, you could call it a fallen world or a broken world. And so, I mean, I guess I don't necessarily feel like I have to believe in, say, something like the fall of man necessarily, because I kind of feel like, well, if I go back 10, 15,000 years ago or whatever, I think man was just as fallen then as, I mean, I don't know if we ever had a Garden of Eden, is what I'm saying. So anyway, I'm gonna ramble on.
That's fair enough, but the question then arises, I think, why do we share it? Maybe it's but why do we share a sense that things are not as they ought to be?
Why do we share?
Yeah, just that sense.
Because you and I, you and I both agree that,
like not that.
Right, that's a good question.
Yeah, I think that is a good question. So it's like not that, like we can say why it is this way. It could be because of evolution, or it could just be because of sin, or it could be because of a number of things. But why can us as Christians and you as an atheist agree that it shouldn't be this way? Yeah.
I
as
guess
opposed to what?
Well, I guess as opposed to us being completely amoral or immoral. You mean, in other words, if there is, it's sort of like you're almost kind of asking me the problem of good. It's like instead of the problem of evil, you're asking me the problem of good, which is, if there really is no God, why beauty, why generosity, why kindness? Is that kind of what you're asking?
I think so,
I mean, that works. That's
no, I mean, I do think that's a very interesting question, and I do think, I guess my tentative answer would be that I would take like maybe some non-human primates. I think there's been some studies on them where you have one chimpanzee who's willing to pick the bugs off the back of the other chimpanzee, but it's kind of done with the understanding that the other chimpanzee is going to return the favor. And if you don't return the favor, that chimpanzee has a memory long enough to know that, hey, I'm not picking the bugs off your back because you didn't return the favor to me. And so once human beings, got to the point where they had enough cognitive ability to remember who helped them and who hurt them, and then we started developing and that helped in survival. In other words, you could try to be the lone wolf out there and just survive completely independently, but the people who tried to survive completely independently of everybody else weren't as successful as those who were willing to cooperate. I mean, that's one semi-plausible explanation as to how those of us who are here today, at least many of us, are willing to cooperate with others, willing to sacrifice, at least in the short term, for others. I don't know if that's a completely satisfying explanation, but I've read Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, which I think is an excellent book, by the way. But I think he does a good job of sort of explaining. The subtitle to Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, is Our Modern Denial of Human Nature. And he really takes a real good kick at some people in the secular community who adopted a blank slate approach to human nature, and even people who are religious and who have adopted a blank slate approach too. But he basically he's mostly directed at some people in academia who've taken this idea that human beings are a blank slate, entirely formed by their environment, and actually they're formed a lot by genetics.
Yeah.
I think I rambled off the topic. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, is the blank slate, the tabula rasa, whatever it is. It's completely bunked. I mean, there's no way we have a nature. Even you can study history and see that. It violates just everything.
The fact that we come to so many similar, just the way history repeats itself seems to just kind of debunk that idea that it seems unlikely that if we started with such a blank slate, that the same things would just keep happening and the same selfishness would rise to the top, and greed and stuff like that. And
the common denominator of all of it is people. I mean, different situations, different things. None of them are repeatable history, but it's all people.
Yeah, but I think I don't want to lose sight of your question about the problem of good. It's a very good question. I mean, that's something that S.J. Thomason has asked several times on her channel. Is if not for God, why do human beings act morally? At least in a lot of cases, and that's a good question. I guess my answer may not satisfy everybody, but
I mean, there's some I think your answer has some possibility to it. I didn't find it satisfactory myself before I was a Christian either, but that it kind of reminded me of another question. If you feel like I'm grilling you or anything, or just
I'm looking forward to the grilling.
Okay, but also, so I hadn't thought of it as the problem of good, but I think you articulated that question well. But you have community, right? You mentioned community, and it's fairly, I think, acceptable that human beings are community. I can't articulate that word. They're community animals, I would say, that they desire and require community. It's like, babies can have all their physical needs met, but if they have no physical contact, they will still die, right? Sure. So then we've got that. So we've got the need for community. So why does that exist? Is the question from there? Why do we have a need for a community to that degree?
Well, I mean, and granted, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, and that's the direction I probably would want to go. But I would say that I do think there must have been, there's probably some species out there that I'm not aware of that are really good at just surviving in very isolated circumstances, isolated even from other members of their own species, but we have pack animals that are more community oriented, and there's also some that I suppose can live a little more independently. And I suppose we're just one of those species that evolved in such a way to where we don't do very well on, we just don't do very well on our own. I'm not really answering the question very well, but I imagine that, and I think I'm going to guess that most of these species where they really don't desire community are pretty much the exception to the rule, right? Because if you look at bees, they're even more community oriented than we are. Bees are, the bees will sacrifice themselves for the hive in ways human beings can do that on occasion, but not as consistently, I think, as bees. So I don't know how to answer your question, except to say I need to study more evolutionary biology.
That's fine. Let me offer you a Christian perspective on that, is particularly from the perspective of the Trinity, is if God is the Trinity, is he is three persons in one, and they're from the beginning, before time, they're in a community of three persons giving self-giving other love, selfless love towards others, and then we're made in the image of God. Then it would make sense that we would have an innate desire for love and community.
Yeah, we can let MJ. Hello, MJ. You've been trying to join these like every single time, and you finally made it in after we've been going for like 2 hours and 15 minutes already.
I got like 5 minutes left.
Yeah, but you made it, so there you go.
I just wanted to come in as sort of a joke. I finally made it.
You keep saying something, and then I'm trying to wrap up, and then you just came in. I'm like, whatever.
I'll just watch you watch the football game.
Yeah. I don't know what we're.
All right, good night, everybody. I love you guys.
You're the worst. Yeah. I'm just going to start removing the Zoom link at a certain point. Oh, I feel like I should say something, but I don't even know what at this point. I'm kind of tired myself, and I don't know where we're getting. And I think that was a really good place to kind of end at, though. I do think that was an interesting, the problem of good or whatever is very, good way to we started with, a sort of a problem of evil type, discussion thing. 942. I see that. But ending with the problem of good. So I don't know if you want to add anything right here at the very end, MJ. I don't think you do, but I think if not, we're gonna just
problem of the good. I wish everyone a very good night.
There you go. Yeah, I think we're gonna end it here.
I'm so privileged.
Yeah, everybody watching.
For you to allow me in here. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, people should check out MJ's channel too. He is very not
What's
as
it
many
called?
subscribers as he should. It's called Democracy of the Dead. So I don't know why you have so few subscribers. You guys have, I guess it's because you don't post all that often, but.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna.
You were going pretty good for a little while.
I stink at marketing myself.
Where did you get your title from? Democracy of the Dead.
That comes from Chesterton, I believe, and he's talking about tradition.
Yeah, I think so.
It
is about tradition.
Yeah, it's about tradition. It's definitely from good old Gilbert Keith.
I had no idea that was his name.
These poor guys that don't like their names have to initial Clive Staples. Oh gosh, that's horrible.
It's a great name.
Call me Jack.
But yeah, with that, I think we're gonna end it here. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
If I can. Boom.